Okay, so in this lesson we're going to go over just how to make a handmade texture. We're going to use a fabric texture for the couch, then we can tweak it out later. And we're going to use Photoshop to create that. And we're going to go in and make a bump map so we can have the fabric actually have a little bit of a bump to it, and it's not like super smooth, like, you know, really shiny, glossy. So it gives it a little more texture to it. So I'm going to go into Photoshop and we're going to make something like this by hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in, I'm going to go File, New, and I'm going to create a 1024 by 1024 72 pixel per inch image. Because we're using textures, we never want to have like 300 or something like that, like we're going to print. We also want to make sure that we're using RGB color 8-bit, not CMYK, once again for print. And I like to use a white background, not an artboard, because I like to have a background on it. When I use an artboard, it just puts everything, it starts off with layers. And what happens is when you bring that file in at times into Maya, it'll say, if you do it a certain way, it'll think that there's a transparency when there isn't. But it's not really a big deal, but this is the setup that I usually use. So now I've got a white background. It's locked to the bottom, and I'm just going to duplicate it by left mouse dragging it right into this little icon in the layers, and now I've got a new copy. And let's hit default here, and I want to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. And I would set it to about 19. And one thing, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, I like using monochromatic Gaussian. If you see uniform, it's a lot flatter. It doesn't have as high of contrast. So uniform tends to stay in the mid-range grays, whereas Gaussian, you see I have black pixels, and even though it's on a white background, I have white pixels as well, and it's giving me a much broader range here. And monochromatic, because I'm going to be using this as a bump map. Now you can use, for different instances, non-monochromatic, which is giving me the red, blue, green variations of pixels, but a bump map only sees grayscale, and I'm going to work with that. And I have it about 19%. So now that I've got my noise, I'm going to go in and I'm going to run another filter of a motion blur. And this basically takes those and makes it almost like it's wet and stretches it. Control plus to zoom in. Now what it's doing is it's taking that noise and it's spreading it in a direction that I decide here. And I want it 90 degrees up and down. And I'm just spreading it out so it's vertical. Now the more or less that I do it, I have it about 34 pixels. We could see we can get it a much shorter range. And this, you have to experiment and play with what you like. But I use this particular technique to make everything from wood to hair to fabric, and you'll see how it works. So I'm going to take it to about 30. That's okay. Now before I take it a step further, I'm going to hit Control L, and this pulls up my levels, and this is showing the values in my image. Shadows, the darkest points, the midtones, and the highlights. There's a lot. It's definitely more white than anything else. So as I pull this in, I'm going to tighten that range up, and we can see the pattern a lot more. And I could vary this up. Once again, this is going to be more of a situation where you're deciding. You have to experiment as you're playing with it. I'm keeping it somewhat mid, right around there. That should be fine. And now I'm going to take this image, this layer, and I'm going to duplicate it. And we'll call this one vertical. And I'm going to make this one horizontal so you get what I'm doing. And what I need to do with this layer is hit Control T for the free transformation. And I'm going to hold down left mouse button and Shift so I can rotate it so it's exactly 90 degrees and press Enter to lock it down. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend these layers together. So let me zoom in a little bit. Right now you can't see the underlying layer at all. So I'm going to go to Normal, or the normal, I've been working in 3D too much, normal blending mode, which means you can't, it's not blending at all. And on a PC, you can just use your mouse roller once I've clicked and just start going through. And if you're on a Mac, it doesn't work that way for some strange reason. You have to manually choose and go down the row. But I'm using my mouse roller, that's why you don't see it. And look at what's happening. Let me zoom in a little bit. So I can decide how I want these to blend together. And the general idea is that I can actually get this to look more like some sort of a woven fabric as I script through these. I like lighten. And look at that, where we can see there's some depth to it. It looks like there's threads interwoven with each other, and that's the fabric that I want. Okay. So, but it's just an effect of this blending on top of this one and lightening certain areas. So I'm going to hit Control A to select all, or you would just go, let's see, I'm so used to just using my shortcuts. So I've selected all, I've got everything here. You could also just do the marquee and grab a whole thing, whichever. And I'm going to go to Edit, Copy Merged. And now I'm going to paste it. Control V. And now it's pasted on this layer. So now it's flattened. Now, I always like making a backup so that I can tweak things out and I don't have to redo things if I don't want. So I'm looking at this and thinking maybe I want to adjust this a little bit. So I'm just going to duplicate it. And now I'm going to hit Control L again. And I'm just going to tighten that up so I can see the fabric a little bit more. So I like that. That's looking pretty good. I can see the depth of the fabric. I'll be able to get a nice little bump off of there. And when I start to color it, it'll give me some contrast of those threads. The ones that are higher up are the ones that are going to be more worn because people are sitting on it and it's going to be touching things, and it's just going to be a little lighter than the ones that are more tightly packed underneath. I hit OK. And this is going to be a my bump. So I'm just going to call this one, double click there, fab bump or fabric bump map. Okay. And but what I want to do with this is I want to fix this, because if I want this texture to be tiled seamlessly. And this is a 1024 by 1024 image. So if I go in and I run a filter, other, offset, and that's going to shift it by however many pixels I choose. I'm going to choose 512 by 512 so that, and wrap around, so that basically what were those edges is now in the center. I've offset it 50%, half the resolution inward and vertically. So now I can see the seam that would repeat, and I don't want that. Okay, I don't want this pattern repeating all over my nice little couch. So I want to get rid of that. And to do that, I'm going to go in And I'm going to choose the spot healing brush tool. And I'm just going to kind of go through it and go across the seam with a larger brush. And get rid of that so I don't have that seam anymore. And now to make sure I didn't create a brand new one, I'm going to do that same filter offset again. I could just hit offset. It'll use, this is the shortcut to the last filter I used with the last settings. And I see that it's cool. So I'm just going to save this one as a Targa. You can also use a JPEG, but I like Targas because they don't compress and, you know, but you just can't see them in a browser or anything like that, but they're lossless. And I'm just going to call this one Fabric Bump Map. And I'm going to save it at 24 bits. I would save it with 32 if it has an alpha channel, if there were parts that have transparencies, but it doesn't. So I'm just going to say 24-bit, which means 3 channels, not that 4th alpha. That's saved. Now I want to do a color version of this. Now I could either color this inside of Maya, or I could actually make a colored variation in here. So I'm going to make a brand new layer, and I'm going to fill it with a color. And sort of a mid-tone color. And it doesn't, I can always change it. So I'm just going to start off with something a little more orangey brown, like that. And to fill it, on a PC, it's Alt backspace to fill with the foreground color, Control backspace to fill with the background. Now, of course, it covers up that layer beneath it, so I can go back in and then start to change my blending modes and check it out. Here we start to see again it affecting that texture. Look at that, how rich that one is, because this one would give me a much, much thicker, you know, kind of darker pattern. And you can experiment and save different versions of it and see which ones you like. But I like going through the whole gamut of blending layers to see what I would like. Now the cool thing is, no matter which one I choose, I can always go to this layer. I have it selected. That's the one I've been changing the blending modes. And if I actually hit Control U, I could change the color of that at any time to give me a different variation of it. Let's see. That one's actually nice. This one would be more like a beige color, which actually might look pretty cool. So you have to just kind of decide, once again, aesthetically what you want. And it's okay to try different versions to see what you like. So let's say I'm going to save this one. I will do an edit. Actually, let's do a select all, Control A, edit, copy, merged, paste. And that's one variant. I'm going to turn that one off. Go back to this one. Try a different variant. Maybe something like this. Now, here's a fun way of like just kind of, I like this, maybe I like this brown. I'm going to select all, edit, copy, merged, paste, but then take that bump and put it on top of it and change its blending mode. And I can pop it out and get more depth. See that? And I can shut them off and on to see what effects it's going to have and how much I like it. And you can see this is popping out that those white, what would be white threads a lot more. So once again, this is totally aesthetic. It's totally deciding what in particular you're trying to get. Is it this darker variant or is it the lighter one? Select all, edit, copy, merged, paste, turn that one off. And I can always just keep on going, and I can always just change certain colors. Okay. So, but after I've saved those up, and then I would just save the colored ones out. I'd go in and I'd say, oh, File, Save As. I like that, sort of like a burlap kind of deal. Targa, Fabric, Beige. This would also make a nice texture for like a lampshade as well. File, Save As, Targa. All these are going in my source images folder. Fabric, brown. There we go. Let's just stick to those. And that's how I would prepare the textures for tiling to put on here. The next phase would be making that material and attaching it to there.